Taking a minute, well, a little bit more than a minute, to take a look at this Matchlock that I just recently finished. I built almost the entire gun from scratch, except for the barrel, which was given to me. So we'll break down a little bit of the specifics in a moment, but I want to take a look overall. It's a Arab style stock on the gun, an Arab style stock with an English reverse style lock. So this is not a historically accurate piece by any means, but it certainly combines some characteristics that I think are aesthetically pleasing and mechanically very interesting. This would be classified as a Jezail rifle. A Jezail is kind of a localized rifle made by many of the Arabs in North Africa and Arabia. I was reading that it's specified that Jezail has to be rifled, though most of the ones I see classified as Jezails are smoothbore muskets. They were usually made with a flint lock. They were made usually with a brown bess lock and a brown bess barrel. But for it to be classified officially as a Jezail, it must be rifled. So I guess many of the examples aren't actually Jezails. They're just custom-made guns, but it's a lot like what happened in America with the Kentucky rifles. You had like the Kentucky and Pennsylvania rifles, which were rifles that used components that were from Europe, but used in a way that were built and customized for people in the New World. I wanted to start by looking at the stock. So we're going to take a look at the stock before it was finished so that I can kind of explain the process that was involved in making this stock. So it's a maple stock that my brother-in-law / good friend Ben had. His mother had bought it for him at a flea market, I think for $15 or $20, something like it. It was ridiculously cheap for a stock blank, but so the blank that you get is just a piece of wood that's kind of roughly in the shape of a gun, but you have to carve it all out and everything, and it's a piece of, like I say, maple, so it was really comfortable. It was good wood to work with, but the reason that she got the wood so cheap was that it had been cut too small. I think it was and he even told her that there was an issue with it, and so whenever I got it, it was very much, it would have made a very nice kind of Kentucky rifle, which is the common form to be made around here, Kentucky rifle or Pennsylvania rifle or a Lancaster rifle. But of course I had a different kind of approach with it that I wanted to do, and so by its nature there wasn't enough wood on the back end of this stock to be able to flare out into the fishtail that I wanted for the Arab style stock. So what I had to do in the section that I'd painted orange there, I had to laminate two pieces of wood onto the top and bottom to form the fishtail. And so the top and bottom pieces there are actually oak, and I couldn't find any wood that matched the grain closely or anything like that, just right offhand. And this project was very much about what I could find on hand and use that I didn't have to go, search a lot for or spend a lot of money on. And so I just went to the hardware store and got a couple pieces of oak that are used for cabinetry and laminated those two pieces together. So it's like a sandwich. And then I took those two pieces and cut them, and then cut the stock and fit them on and shaped them together there. And the shape worked out well. Again, that's not an ideal way to do it. I'd put a screw in the top and bottom, and then after it dried, took the screws out, took the clamps off. But it's very strong. It holds on very well. And so from an early stage, I was fairly certain I wasn't going to be able to finish this stock in a way like traditional guns, where I'd be able to stain the stock. So common with the Jezails and the Arab guns is the back ends of them are usually covered in some sort of embroidered fabric or something decorative like that. So I thought I would just borrow that from the same style I was already using and just use that to cover the back end. So early on, I also decided that I wasn't going to put a ramrod on this gun, which is very unusual for a muzzle loader. But one, it just aesthetically, it didn't match what I wanted. And two, a lot of times, well, I don't want to say a lot of times, but many times, a lot of these Jezails that you see examples of, they weren't built to have a ramrod on them. I mean, many were, but I've seen several examples where there's not an obvious place where a ramrod would have been. And so I've discussed this with a few people, and I think that may either be A, it was carried as a separate piece, B, maybe there was a place at one point and it got lost, and so they converted it to where it looked like it didn't have one. Or C, maybe they used, at least with the smooth bores, they used a tapping method of loading it instead of actually using a ramrod to load it with, which you would almost need for a rifle, but for a smooth bore, like some of the ones I mentioned earlier, you could use a tapping method to load it, and so maybe they didn't. I don't know, but irregardless of all of that, I really just aesthetically it didn't match what I was looking for. So I just decided not to put it on there, and considering this is, I mean, it has to be functional, and of course I'm going to play with it and use it, but it's in large part going to be a wall piece. I don't plan on doing a lot of field work with this gun or hunting with it or anything, so it's not a big deal to me to just have the ramrod as a separate piece that I carry with me. Outside of that, the stock forming was fairly straightforward. The barrel channel was already cut, but it didn't quite fit the barrel, so I had to do some of that work. I also had to laminate another piece right above where the back of the lock is. In this version, or in this photo, I haven't done that yet, I don't think, but I used the same sort of oak method and put it on. And I also kind of knew from an early point that I wanted to paint this gun. I wanted to paint it black enamel. So the issues with the imperfections in the stock were less of a big deal than they would be otherwise. Another place where I can spend quite a bit of time is on the lock itself. This by far was where I invested the most time in this project, was building the lock. Now I could have easily, I guess, bought a lock to put on it, and it's a simple enough kind of lock to build, but the issue by and large was the gun itself. The way the stock was far too narrow for really any of the commercial locks that are English locks like this that I could find. And part of it was I kind of wanted to play with the forge and build the cock piece there that looks like the little fish or sea monster thing, which was not terribly uncommon in these pieces. They would make them look like a bird or something. So none of the commercial locks I could find, most of them were made in India and were way too big. The lock plate I did actually order one to kind of look at as an example, and it didn't help me a whole lot because it was 1 inch tall by about 9 inches long, and the lock was just way too big for what I wanted. Now, those size locks weren't terribly uncommon in English pieces, during the time of the English Civil War. Military pieces traditionally have larger locks. I think that's because they're easier to produce and work on than smaller locks. So the lock plate on this one is right around 3/4 of an inch to about 7 inches long. I think I ended up expanding it. This wasn't the final lock plate. It might be, but the final lock plate was just under an inch tall and about 7.5 inches long. And so again, it would have been a lot easier just to buy a lock. The lock I bought was $50, but part of this project was I wanted to learn to build the gun, so I taught myself a lot of the metalworking things. And I went through about 9 different variations of this before I settled on this one. Actually attaching the cock, figuring that whole system out was the most difficult. The lock plate itself is just a piece of 1/8 inch sheet, or not sheet metal, but bar metal that I drilled out and tapped to put screws in and then attach everything to it. I might do another video later on the inside of the lock and the specifics of that, but I'm not going to do that right now. But then to actually forge that piece, the cock piece there, so I used a forge to bend a couple pieces of metal to do that. A couple of them broke, so that didn't work whenever I tried to drill them out and attach them. And what I ended up doing was riveting, like the actual cock piece to the bar that goes through, which in turn moves the sear bar. So what I ended up doing was just getting a 1/4 inch piece of steel and using a jigsaw, just a normal, you'd pay for $50 for a jigsaw from Lowe's or something, and just labored through cutting that thing out, and then forged a little bit of it to shape it, And then I used the jigsaw to bifurcate the top, which you'll see in some of the later pictures, and so that bifurcation actually holds the match. A lot of the locks have a piece on it where you would tap out one of the sides of that bifurcation, and then you can tighten and loosen it on the actual match. And I was going to do that with this, but I found that really for what I was using it for, there was no reason to do that. It works just fine without it. There's no reason to do that. And it's just one more step on a little piece that took a lot of work to build, where I feel like I would just break it and then have to start all over with it. But after rebuilding this entire mechanism about 9 times because of mistakes and readjusting things, I got rather good at it, so I could probably build one now in a matter of a couple of hours. But the first one I built took quite a bit of time and energy. And so as you can see, I just tapped it through, and the bolts, all the pieces in the gun are stainless steel that I bought. So the bolts that go through the gun and hold that to it are stainless steel, and I cut those to shape. I did clean up the lock later, so it doesn't really have this dark patina on it. That's just where it was in the forge, but it certainly turned out very well, I think. So now we'll take a look at some of the parts of the finished gun. And I say finished loosely. I'm still piddling with it. There's still things I want to learn how to do on it. So there's still, I don't want to say a lot, but there's still some finish work. I'm going to sand down the stock again and put another level of enamel after I get, some of the last pieces set. I'm going to put in some more of these furniture tacks. So as you can see here, this is the back end of the gun, and the butt plate's actually a piece of brass. Well, it's 2 pieces of brass that I cut to shape and ground down with a Dremel tool and some sandpaper and some files to fit the shape that I wanted. I drilled some small holes through and then used some brass tacks to fix it to the back of the gun. The reason I went with the 2 pieces is simply because it was the easiest thing to find. There's a local antique store I do a lot of business with. I find a lot of my little detail pieces there at Stray Dog Antiques in Charleston, West Virginia. And the people that work there are really great. Brennan and Andrea and Gina, they really do a great job there. But a lot of the components, the smaller things I found for this gun are like behind the counter kind of things. They weren't things that they had out, and I'm kind of reluctant to talk to people in detail about projects I'm working on because I'm self-conscious about them, or artists get that way, I think, sometimes, and I certainly am. But it's great because I'll go in there and kind of loosen up a little bit, and Andrea in particular, I'll mention like, oh, well, I'm looking for like a piece of brass to do a butt plate with, after looking through the store for 20 minutes and not finding what I'm looking for. And she goes, oh, in the back we have some. And then she goes to the back and pulls out these pieces of brass that were door hangers somewhere, I don't know, and they have a bunch of them. And so I bought some of those, and they were like $5 a piece, which was a great deal on them, and cut them into, one of them, the way it's shaped, there were some holes in it from what it had been used for, wouldn't have fit on there very well. So I just went ahead and cut 2 pieces and fixed them kind of together, and then I drilled the holes and tacked them in, and it works great. I sanded them some, and then I used a polisher and a Dremel to clean them up a little bit. Again, kind of the way this gun's built, it's a little rough looking, but I don't want to say rough looking, but it's a little there's a little bit of its character left, I'll put it that way. The goal was not to make something that was like this beautiful, refined piece. It's to make something that looks like it was functional. It looks like an Arab Jezail that's been used. That was kind of the focus. If we move on up the gun, we'll see an example of another piece that I found at Stray Dog. The fabric I looked for online and everywhere else for about 6 months or so. It actually had the whole gun is what took me the longest to settle on. And so I looked around a lot, couldn't find something I wanted, and a lot of the way that I deal with things, I just have to see something, like I have to feel it and see it, and so I would see things online that kind of look like they were what I wanted, but they might not look durable, or they might not look like they have the texture I want, and so I would pass on them, and the whole time, of course, I would go to Stray Dogs every couple of weeks, and so I went in there one day and was going through the fabric, which I had done several times before, and there was a great piece of vintage fabric there. It's a nice kind of burgundy red color. It's got these goldish that match the bronze little flower, patterns on them, and I thought this is great. So I bought 2 yards of it. 1 yard would have been more than enough, but as I anticipated, I screwed this up a couple of times putting it on. I didn't want to have to make another run to the store or risk them running out of it. So I went ahead and got more than I needed. That's a good rule for whenever you're making things from scratch or building something, is if I see a component that I need, I go ahead and buy 2 or 3 of it if it's like affordable or cheap or small, not only in case I screw what I'm doing up now, but then maybe I want to make something later and I need that component. And so this way you gather lots of little kind of character components from all over the place and you can use them. So I still have some of that fabric. If for some reason whenever this fabric wears out, which eventually through use it will, I can at that point change it for something else if I find something else I want, or I can redress it with the same fabric. These are just furniture tacks that I picked up at Lowe's on the bottom. They have lots of different examples, types of furniture tacks. You can get them online. These are just brass ones. This was a lot more difficult than it looked to fixing this fabric to the stock. I use the furniture tacks to do that with, but it's rock maple, it's sugar maple, right? And so brass is not very hard. It would bend steel nails. And so the issue too is I couldn't pre-drill the holes as easily because of the way the fabric is and it's aligned. It would have been a mess. So what I ended up doing actually with each tack was I would take a pair of needle nose pliers and grab the bottom of the tack, like the actual nail part of the tack, and hold it straight, and then drive the tack down through it and just move the needle nose back as the tack went farther and farther and farther. And that would kind of help hold the brass bottom there straight and also keep the head of the tack straight, which was hard. That kept wanting to move around. So it would keep it straight, so it would go in. And again, it's not a perfectly straight line or whatever, but I don't really care. It looks good to me. I like it. And it looks like, it looks like a lot of the Jezails that were made did. It's people made them in their workshops and stuff, and I think it looks good. So a little bit further up this stock, this is where the fabric ends up at the top. As you can see, I put the furniture tacks all the way up, and then there's a piece of brass that I formed around, and I used the same brass that I got at Stray Dog for this. So I just took this and then cut it, and if you see the perforations from where the cutters cut it, I kind of like that as a design on the edge of it, so I left it. And then I used a hammer and just cold hammered this into shape, and it took me a couple hours cutting and grinding and stuff to get this piece actually to fit right. And so then what I did is I drilled holes around it and then drove brass tacks in to hold it. Now, again, this is all about stuff that I have. This is the smallest drill bit I had, actually was the exact diameter of the head of my tacks. So ideally it would have been smaller. It would have been a lot easier. But what I did was just drove the tacks kind of at an angle in a way where they caught the edge of it, and did that all the way around. Again, if I ever have to change this fabric, I have to pull them out anyways, and I just use the same brass tacks I used on the back at the front. At the top and bottom, though, you can see there I changed up a little bit the furniture tacks I was using. And I love this because the furniture tacks that I found here match the design on the fabric, which was totally by accident. I bought that fabric and then I went to Lowe's and bought the furniture tacks for to actually attach the fabric, and then I went to a Home Depot, and the Home Depot had the furniture tacks with the flowers, which I knew existed, and I'm still glad I didn't use the furniture tacks with the flowers on the entire back end of the stock, because I feel like that would have been too much. It would have overdone it. But just with the little accent of those there and the fact that they really do match the design on the fabric very well, it's kind of a happy coincidence I was able to run into those, but I'm happy I just used them there. And that's one of the things I might repeat somewhere else on the rifle. I might cut the actual tack end of it off and set a couple of them in further up the gun to kind of repeat that flower pattern from the back to the front end. Remember, one of our principles of design is repetition. So we want to kind of repeat patterns where we can, and the back end of the gun has a nice repetition of this flower pattern, but we need it somewhere along the stock and the front end, and I'll figure that out over time. But here's the complete back end just from the side, so you can see the fabric, and I did a lot to pull the wrinkles out and pull the fabric tight. The first time I actually put it on, it was nearly perfect, but I had to reapply it, and a little bit of that, what's there doesn't really bother me. And it wasn't so much just for the aesthetics, it's because the more the fabric's going to pull around, the more it's going to wear and get dirty and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to try to keep it taut to do that. But I really am happy with the way the back end of this gun turned out. Like I say, I'm still going to sand down the wood part and repaint some enamel on that, and probably polish up the brass a little bit more. But overall, I think that the back end of the gun has turned out really well. So kind of back up to where the lock is here. You can see the lock and the trigger bar. I went with a trigger bar on the gun instead of a kind of, I don't want to say a traditional trigger, because a trigger bar is a traditional trigger, but there just wasn't enough room inside the actual wood part of the gun to affix a normal trigger. And even if there were, I looked at the two and decided the trigger bar was kind of my best option aesthetically too. As you probably discovered by now, a pattern, much of this gun is driven by aesthetics for me, as far as there's a look I'm thinking about. I really have this thing on backstories, and for me, like, the backstory of this gun is from some place that's like Central or Southern, Eastern Europe, like maybe Hungary, or it came about around the 15th century in a crossroads area. And I had a friend of mine actually remark that it looked like he imagined a Hungarian matchlock would look. But a gun like this, there's not really a big precedent for historically, so that's not what I'm aiming for. But I am big on backstory on things, and it helps you when you're building character in an item you're building, when you're making something and you're trying to make something that looks old or traditional or historic, and this certainly is, whether on purpose or by accident, I don't know, it doesn't matter. But building this idea of history around it's really important, and so I kind of thought about that with every step of the process, from the fabric to what materials I'm using to build it. And, that being said, the trigger bar was, I decided I needed one. I thought about cutting it out of steel or forging one, and I went through this whole process. This entire gun was a process of about 2 years. Probably about a year of that was just in notebooks, obsessively drawing things. I might share some of those in a later video. But so it was all these different components and things that come together to make the gun, intellectually, is studying, obsessively sketching things and that sort of stuff. But a lot of thought went into developing the idea of what kind of gun did I want to build, and I knew I wanted a matchlock because I think that's archaic and cool enough. It's weird, but anyway. So the trigger bar, I was kind of working at the barn, working what I wanted to make into this, and I said, there's got to be an easier way to do this. So there was a stainless steel tent stake that was in kind of a scrap bin, so I just grabbed that and took a butane torch and a hammer and just smashed the side out of it, and then bent it the shape I wanted and drilled a hole in the top, and it's just screwed into the inside of the stock, and the spring works right against it, so it's just fine. It works perfectly, stays in place, does its job. So yeah, you can see here the actual lock plate's a little marred up from just putting it together, working on it while I've been doing it. I'm going to clean that up a little bit, but I am going to leave some of that character on there. I kind of like it. And you can see again up with the cock piece, I kind of have cleaned it up a little bit, but I am going to leave it a little too. You don't want to get it too clean. You want it to look like it's been somewhere. So, and it has. It's been in the workshop quite a few times. It's been in and out of my mind, so it's been places. The pan there, we'll get to in a minute, but the pan development was pretty easy, but there was a lot of work in it because the tools I have are limited. I don't have a workshop specifically designed to do metalworking with, so it's just a matter of figuring out what I needed. So here you can see kind of a close-up of the pan, and as well as the back end of the barrel. So the pan, I actually just got a 1/2-inch thick piece of 1-inch bar steel, and took a Dremel tool with a cutting end and just went to town on it. I went through probably 8 or 9 of the kind of cutting wheels on a Dremel tool and cut the shape roughly out that I needed, and then took files and sandpaper, that sort of thing, cleaned it up a little bit. Drilled and tapped a hole in the top of the pan, and then just out of a piece of 1/8-inch 1-inch bar, cut a cut a top for the pan and then just screwed it in. Now, one of the problems with this that I'll have to resolve, I guess I'll have to, but is the screw, whenever you open and close the pan a couple times, comes loose, and so then you have to retighten it. It's not that big of a deal, again, because it's not a gun I'm going to be taking out hunting or anything. It's just to play with, and I've usually got my tools out when I'm piddling around with black powder anyways. I mean, you know how that is. So I've usually got stuff out of here, so it's not a big deal. But I would have to fix that, but that was the most kind of direct way I could see to attach it at the time, and not having a ton of knowledge in these going into it in terms of building them. I just did what I had from scratch. Could have bought one, but didn't because, I had most of the stuff on hand. It's welded onto the barrel, so I took it over to my uncle's house. It took him about 30 seconds to weld this onto the barrel. And it works great. I mean, it works just fine. The pan is, historically the pan is the right size, but for me it's probably a little big. I don't load any more powder into this than I do into a flintlock, even though there's more space for it. I find that it has no problem lighting after that. I've dry fired this gun quite a few times, and it's shot just fine every time. I'll just bring this up for a second and show it, but this is the bifurcation in between the cock piece. So what I did was I just took it and put it in a vise, put a jigsaw down the middle of it, and then took a file and some sandpaper and cleaned it out. I just did the design on the one side, and I did it before I cut it, and I'm probably not going to do one on the other side simply because it's not the show side, and it's just, there's not any need to do that, so I'm probably not going to do it. Here's a close-up of the actual cock piece now after it's been cleaned up a little bit. Again, I'm not going to clean it up a lot. I might go back through and polish it a little bit more, but I like the dark spots and a little bit of the marring and stuff. It adds to the character. I think I originally planned on this being kind of a fishy, serpenty thing. It looks similar to ones that were on some of the English and Italian reverse locks. I just really kind of like him, so he's staying around. You can see the match cord is wrapped up at the front. I'd kind of planned on doing that. Again, it's an aesthetic thing for me, wrapping the match cord at the front. And I make my own match cord. It's very easy to make. You can find out how to do it online. My method's a little bit more complicated, but that's just the way I do things, I guess. I actually twist my own jute twine into rope. I soak the strands first and then spin the twine into this thicker rope, and in doing so it dries it out, but enough of the potassium nitrate remains in it that it stays lit very well. Here's on the reverse side of the gun. This is the opposite side from the lock. I just wanted to show the information on the barrel to show I did indeed just get the barrel. He gave it to me from a flintlock that he had, that had a flintlock or a percussion, I don't know, but that had broken. I think it was a flintlock, and so the stock broke, or there was some issue, and so he had this barrel, and it was sitting around for, I know, years before I got it, and I cleaned it and did all that with it, and it hadn't accumulated a lot of rust, but it's a Peter Soley. It's a 50 caliber black powder rifle barrel. It's just a barrel like you get on any sort of gun. It's a straight octagonal. It's not swamped or anything, so there is a lot of dead weight in it, but it was free, and it's my first gun to make, so I can't complain at all about it. I really kind of like, again, aesthetics. I like the way it looks with the stock style and stuff, so I can't complain about it. So here's the reverse side from the lock. As you can see, I've just got two stainless steel round head bolts holding the whole thing in. I thought about recessing those a little bit and putting some brass washers in, but I don't feel any need to. I've had a couple people tell me that they think I should probably put a brass plate there just because they think it looks better. I don't think it does. I'm probably just going to leave this configuration because, quite frankly, I think it looks just fine, and it functions just fine as well. Originally, I had actually planned on one of the ways, and I may still do this, to repeat that flower pattern, the kind of chrysanthemum pattern, is to make brass washers that look like those and inset them, which you see in Japanese Matchlock sometimes, and so they function as a washer, and then I'll seat the screw in that, but I'm not going to do that right now. So for right now, this will be the configuration that stays, and you can see there's a mar kind of up on the enamel where I've been working on the gun after I painted it. That's fine. I'm going to sand it down and do some more enamel on it anyways. The last component I want to look at in this video is the barrel itself. You can see it's got some striations in it. That's where I've taken sandpaper to it, and I'm going to polish it a little bit more. It was completely kind of rust blued. It was it was brownish colored, and I didn't really like the way that went with the aesthetic, so I sanded some of it down. I like that it's a little rough. I like that there's a remnant of it there, but I do like the silver. It matches the rest of the gun well with the black. It looks pretty good, so I'm going to polish that up a little bit, but that's a little bit of the finish work that still needs done. Well, that completes my introductory video for the gun that I worked on. I hope you all have enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments or feel free to get in touch with me. Thank you all for watching.